I've been a health and fitness enthusiast first for basically my entire adult life. And more recently, an author and a podcast host. And kind of, it started out in sort of the journalism writing realm. You know, my background professionally is communications and writing and things like that. And at some point, I just decided to, instead of working in the corporate world, to kind of meld the things I was good at with the things I'm interested in, which is learning about human performance and health and wellness, and also more recently with a bit of a focus on women's strength training and women's kind of overall resilience and health, because I think in some areas we're kind of lacking. Historically, we've been lacking some knowledge on how to best support women in building strength.
Hey, thank you for joining us, and it's good talking to you again. I know it's been about 2 years since I last chatted with you, I think, something like that.
Yeah, a lot has happened in the last couple of years.
A lot has happened. We'll talk about it. Well, where are you? I think for some reason I was thinking you're in Florida. Is that where you're at still?
No, I was spending a lot of time in Florida, but I'm actually currently in Ontario, Canada. So a little different,
okay.
But still pretty hot right now where I am. So
well, now it is, yeah. It's not hot in the wintertime. I've been there. I was there in December and it was cold. Not this December, a few Decembers ago. So anyway, well, actually, just for the sake of those that aren't familiar with you, just kind of give us a little of your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I've been a health and fitness enthusiast first for basically my entire adult life, and more recently an author and a podcast host. And kind of, it started out in sort of the journalism writing realm. You know, my background professionally is communications and writing and things like that. And at some point, I just decided to, instead of working in the corporate world, to kind of meld the things I was good at with the things I'm interested in, which is learning about human performance and health and wellness, and also more recently with a bit of a focus on women's strength training and women's kind of overall resilience and health, because I think in some areas we're kind of lacking. Historically, we've been lacking some knowledge on how to best support women in building strength. So there's that. And then since the pandemic started, I wrote 2 cookbooks, one specifically about organ meats, which I think makes me relatively unique in the already niche meat market. There's not a lot of organ meat specific cookbooks out there. And then I wrote a second one just recently called Carnivore-ish, which is, kind of, I guess, delving a little bit more into the nuance of the carnivore approach and how, there's no one size fits all, I think, for people. And that's it. And I had a baby. And so, the last couple of years have been a very active time for me.
Okay. I didn't realize you had a baby. Well, congratulations. Little boy, little girl, or?
A little boy. He's going to be 1 in a few weeks, actually. So it's been a wild year. Yeah,
that'll put a lot of, that provides a lot of change to your life, undoubtedly. Yeah, for sure. And so you're up in Ontario. How did you get interested in, I guess, obviously organ meat, carnivore-ish? What drove you there? It's still relatively, although the sort of the general knowledge of it is expanding pretty rapidly, and there's more and more people that are delving into carnivory or carnivorism, however you want to say it. But how did you sort of get involved in that?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I think that even before I kind of cared about nutrition, like I had probably a pretty common trajectory. Like a lot of people, I started out with like fitness and wanting to be strong and like lifting weights. And then when I kind of got past my early 20s and like realized that nutrition matters, you get past that like initial hump where you can kind of get away with everything. And I was like, okay, food matters. But like even looking back, before I cared about what I was eating, I always had sort of a tendency towards protein. And I think I'm really fortunate that I was always somebody who kind of, I don't know, like listened to what my body was telling me instead of maybe what like the mainstream diet culture was telling me to do. And I'm really fortunate to have that experience. But my background nutritionally has always been sort of like an ancestral health approach and like a very just sort of common sense, like the food that's the least processed, that's, the most nutrient dense, bioavailable. It just makes sense that that's what you're going to want to focus on. And I've always known that animal protein was the most nutrient dense and bioavailable food for human beings. And so as I was continuing sort of through my career, but also my own personal journey about learning about these things and optimizing my own health, I recognized that if I'm eating a lot of meat, which I am, and I want to continue to optimize and make the best use of the food that I'm eating, that organ meats make sense. And so I've also never been someone who's particularly squeamish, and like I've always kind of liked, like the gristly bits and dark meat and like bone in meats and stuff. So it wasn't like a far reach for me to try these things. And I kind of always looked at food like an adventure, like an experiment, like try something new. And if you don't like it, you're right back where you started. But if you enjoy something and you find something that brings you more health, I mean, it's a win-win situation really with trying new foods. So I kind of just started experimenting with organ meats. I just started buying some stuff and playing around. And I was sharing stuff on social media, and I was getting some interesting responses, like people saying like, what the hell, or gross, or yuck, or whatever. But then there were some people who were like, what are you doing? Like, I'm interested in this. And so I started to realize that there might be a small, and it turns out there's actually a bigger community than I thought, but a small community who is interested in learning about this stuff. And that's where the idea for the book came. Because in my research, if you're looking for organ meat resources, how to cook or prep or source organ meats, and it's changing now in the last couple of years, but originally it was like, you need to go find like old Italian cookbooks, or you need to find cookbooks from classically trained French chefs who are so light years away from the kind of cooking I'm doing at home that it was not relevant to me, right? And I didn't think that those cookbooks would be reaching the kind of people I was trying to reach, which are people like me who are not trained chefs, who want to eat really nutritious food and want to experiment at home and feel empowered to do that. So so I just kind of like, it was a process of years of learning and experimentation and trial and error on my part, and learning as I went that created the book. And it's like, it's cliche, but it really is a resource, a piece of work that if I can do it, anybody can do it, because I have no special skills when it comes to cooking or like organ meat stuff specifically. So it's been really empowering for me, and I hope that other people find that too.
Yeah, I want to get into that, but I mean, you mentioned that meat was rich in protein, but a skinny vegan told me that broccoli has more protein than beef. What do you say about when those folks say, well, yeah, clearly you got more protein.
Yeah. I feel like you can speak to this like better than I can. And like, I get exhausted with stuff like this really quickly, because I just feel like people who can't read the facts or refuse to read the facts and the science, there's no convincing them, right? Like I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I'm not trying to convince vegans of anything anymore. I still get messages from people who are like, oh, I used to be vegan, or I am currently plant-based and I'm starting to notice some health issues. And do you have some advice for me? Like, great. But people who really think that eating a side of broccoli is the same or better than eating a couple ounces of steak, like, I can't convince you, because you're not looking at facts and science. But if we need to reiterate it, I talk about this in both of my books, that it's a like bioavailability thing, it's an amount thing, it's a digestion thing. If you want to get your protein from quinoa, for example, I don't even want to talk about broccoli because I don't eat it and it's gross, so I'm just gonna like put it over there. But if you like quinoa, for example, and you want to get your protein from quinoa, you have to eat 3 cups of it to get what you get from 3 or 4 ounces of beef. And that's a lot of food. That's going to probably impact your digestion, most likely. And also, if you're caring about calories or caloric intake, which a lot of women specifically are, it doesn't make sense. And those are also the people, coincidentally, who are being most sold this plant-based approach, women, because they do a lot of the purchasing for families. They do a lot of the purchasing of like diet plans and things like that. And we're the ones who are being really directly marketed to eat these foods instead of the actual nutrient-dense foods that we so sorely need for our health. And that's why I feel so passionate about it, because I have people and clients coming to me who have reproductive health issues, cycle health issues, of course, body composition issues, strength issues. And it's because they're being sold a lie about what's good for their bodies. And it sucks. So.
Yeah, you see women often pressured to be very, very thin, and you can get very thin if all you eat is salads and an occasional strip of lean chicken breast, and that works. But like I said, it comes at the sacrifice of lean mass, and we see so many women, that aren't, I see this. It's not overweight is bad, and therefore being super thin is good because there's in the middle, which is lean mass, and I think it's important. And I see so many people when I go out and about, and it's like I'm playing they're either obese or they're frail. There's not much in between. There's no people that I would consider to be particularly healthy just on appearance alone, and that's not the only thing that matters, but it does. Your appearance says a lot about you, believe it or not. As a physician, you're trained to state the appearance is the first thing you're taught to look at this person. What do they look like? Do they look healthy to you? Do they look as old as they say they are? Do they look, frail? Do they look, on and on? And so that's an important part of the physical examination. You're talking. So let's talk about organ meats a little bit. I don't personally eat them. I never liked them. I've tried them. I don't like them. They don't do anything for me. I think I'm fine. Quite honestly, I'm still pulling world class numbers, so I'm not concerned about it for a person. But there are people that certainly do tend to and state that they benefit from them, and it may be early on in their journey and they come from a particularly nutrient deprived sort of situation. Maybe they were on a standard American diet, eating nothing but garbage for 20 years, or plant based diet where they didn't get enough nutrition. What are most people are familiar with liver is kind of the main one that most people are familiar with, and kidney and sweetbreads and things like that. What does the gamut of things look like for you? I know some people don't consider, bone marrow as an organ meat. I mean, it kind of technically is. Doesn't quite have the same sort of appeal as a big old kidney sitting out there. But what kind of things? Let's just talk about your book. Let's just talk about what's in it. How do you make these things? Why do you think they're not palatable to many people? That's an important question, because a lot of people say they just don't taste good to me. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts. First of all, Shawn, I didn't know that I'd have to convince you. So I guess I got to get you a copy of my cookbook and see
No, I
if
mean,
I
you
can
don't need to
convince
convince
you to
me.
eat
I
some of
mean,
my recipes. I
I've
thought you were going to be like pro organ meats. I didn't know I'd have
no,
to
I'm
come
not.
here
I'm not
and
anti-organ
convince
meat.
you.
I am. I'm like, if it works, it works.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fair. And I mean, I think too, people like assume that I'm eating like organ meats all day, every day, and I don't.
Right,
To me,
sure,
that's the
sure.
other kind of beauty of how nutrient dense they are, is that you don't have to eat a lot of them to reap
Mhm.
the benefits. But I will say, as somebody who has cared about my health and my nutrition for a long time, and who has been, I guess equal parts fortunate and just, I figured it out how to maintain my own health. I noticed a significant uptick in my health when I started incorporating organ meats. So it's something that, maybe, I don't know, it depends on the person. And maybe there was something nutritionally, mineral wise, I was missing, whatever. But I enjoyed good health until I started eating organ meats. And then it like leveled up for me, which I didn't really think was a thing that would happen. So but there's so many questions there. I mean, the one thing that I'll say when people tell me like organ meats don't taste good and so I don't want to eat them, like my initial reaction, maybe now because I'm a mother, is kind of like, suck it up and like eat it because it's good for you. Like, we're not supposed to eat chocolate cake every day. Like, every food that we eat isn't supposed to be the most delicious thing in the world. I guess you could say if you're only eating steak, then you are eating only tasty food all the time. But I mean, growing up, we never like scoffed at the idea that we should eat vegetables even though they don't taste delicious, because we were told they were healthy. Eat your
Mhm.
vegetables, they're good for you. Don't eat them because they're delicious, eat them because they're healthy. And that's kind of how I feel about organ meats. Like, not everything we eat needs to be hyper palatable. That's part of the problem, I think, with food culture these days, is that we expect everything to be delicious and immediate and quick and easy. And the reality is organ meats can take a little bit more work. They are maybe a little bit more, I don't know, they take a little bit more finesse to like find and source and cook and all of those things. But I would also say that if you have had negative experiences with organ meats, that maybe you just haven't tried the right recipe or the right cut. Because as you said, everyone kind of thinks about liver when I think about organ meats, but every piece of the animal that is not muscle meat is an organ. We're talking skin, we're talking bone marrow, like you said, things like tongue and heart and kidney, like tripe, all of these things. They all have a vast range of textures and flavors and ways that you can prepare them. So you don't have to eat liver, and you don't have to eat it all the time, but you can hide it in other foods you already like. So if you're a big ground meat person, get your butcher, or you can order these online. You can get the like 4-to-1 ratio ground beef to ground organs, so that you're not really even tasting the organ meats, but you're getting sort of a more nutrient boosted version of the meatballs or sausages or whatever you're already making, Yeah, and I mean, some organs are delicious, like you just touched on. Bone marrow, delicious. Tongue, anybody here who's listening who's had like tongue tacos, shredded tongue, it's like brisket or pulled pork. It's absolutely delicious. It's just something that most people aren't familiar or comfortable with finding and prepping at home, because we're so used to like prepackaged chicken breasts that don't look like anything, that don't remind us of anything. And when you go out and source a tongue and it straight up looks like a tongue, except it's 3 pounds, that can be really intimidating for people. But, I again encourage, and this is the journey that I went through, I encourage like kind of being in that discomfort a little bit and like understanding it, because if you are somebody who eats meat, you have acknowledged at some point that it's okay to eat animal flesh and for an animal to die for you so that you can be nourished. And so it's so arbitrary to consider a steak or a chicken thigh appropriate and a kidney or a tongue disgusting or extreme, right? It's just that we've moved so far away from where we've been historically with being closer to our food source and closer to the process of it, So yeah, I mean, there's a learning curve, there's some discomfort there, but I think that it's worth it. Going back to the nutrition side of it, if all of us here are kind of on board with the fact that animal protein is very nutrient dense, bioavailable source of the things that our bodies need. Organ meats generally are just a more like concentrated version of that. So all of these essential amino acids and these minerals and vitamins and antioxidants that we're getting, you're just getting sort of in higher amounts in smaller doses from things like heart and liver and gizzards and kidneys. So, if you're trying to eat less meat for whatever reason, organ meat is a good option because you can eat less of it and get the nutrition that you want. If you're experiencing like all of this like inflation and everything being so expensive, organ meats are a great option because they're generally cheaper. You can also eat less of it. And then if you're concerned about the morality or the sustainability or the ethics of it, if we are going to have animals die for our nourishment, let's use all of it and find ways to benefit from that. So I got all the arguments locked and loaded if you need them.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because a lot of the organ meats end up in dog food, and a lot of sausages. You get like Braunschweiger and liverwurst and stuff like that, and
which is delicious, by the way.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to that, and I've had some. I think one of the two, and I thought that was not bad. I'm just going to be honest. I mean, I find organ meats to be either unpalatable or not bad. Has been my rate. I haven't had anything I say, oh my God, this is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. And I get your point about, I was taught eat your vegetables because they're good for you, and now I don't eat any vegetables because I don't think they're good for me. So it's kind of an interesting sort of dichotomy there. What do you find like the most challenging one to sort of deal with? If there's something like kidney or something like that. A lot of people say I like liver, but I don't like kidney. Which ones do you find really hard to sort of, and I just wonder what it is in those organs. I mean, liver, maybe the copper, there's a coppery taste, maybe it's the copper. But what do you find to have the real challenging ones to sort of prepare, and how do you get over that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is kind of dependent on personal taste, but I will say, like on one end, probably one of the two easiest that most people, maybe especially if they're prepared for them, they will enjoy them across the board, would be tongue, like I said, and heart, because heart is a muscle. So it's like an organ, but it's also a muscle meat. It has a very like beefy texture. So a lot of people who don't like organ meats, it's because like liver has this kind of different texture that they don't like. And heart is a super, super versatile cut that you can, you can make it on the grill like a steak, or you can chop it up, or you can stuff it and roast it. And it just has a very kind of more familiar flavor and texture. But on the other end, I would say personally, I do not enjoy kidney at all. I find that a really tough organ to eat. It's a very strong flavor. And, there's like the ammonia issue, like we know what sort of the kidney is doing in the body. And I mean, there's also like these misconceptions that kidneys and livers, they're like these filter organs that hold on to all of the toxins of an animal, and so it's scary to eat them. And so I want to kind of debunk that idea. But the reality is these organs do different things in the body, and that's going to possibly have an impact on how they taste, right? And kidney, I just find to be a very, very strong flavor that I do not enjoy. With that said, I've had people tell me that they don't like liver, but they love kidney. So I think it completely depends on the person, really.
Yeah, I've seen, different preparations like with kidney or liver, soaking it in milk and
Yeah.
different strategies to sort of, I guess, change the flavor profile. What, what do you do? How do you cook kidneys so you say they don't taste bad, or liver? What are the tricks you're using?
Well, I mean, again, if you hate the flavor, I mean, I think some people in the comments were saying like you can't hide liver. I argue with you, you can hide liver. However, it's like small amounts. Like you're not gonna cook a 6-ounce liver steak and then hide it under like sauce or cheese. You're not gonna hide it. But if you're like real subtle and you kind of sprinkle it in with your other food, yes, you can. But it's tricky. But yeah, I would say like again with liver, like one of the most popular things that I make is a chicken liver mousse, right? So we're talking like liverwurst and like pâtés and things like that. Historically, everyone loves those. They're delicious because they're also butter and cream and spices, maybe a little bit of booze in there. Like, that's going to be delicious for most people. But there's nothing wrong with that. I make chicken liver mousse like once a month. I'm feeding it to my kid. It's nutrient dense. You eat a couple spoonfuls. Like you don't need to sit there and eat a bowl of it. So I'd say like a pâté or a mousse or a liverwurst is a really good way for people to get started. And then, like I said, kind of chopping stuff up and mixing it in. Like I have no issue with people hiding organ meats in their food if they want to. I have tons of recipes that are like, essentially, I have a bone marrow burger that's like incredibly rich, but it's sort of made with bone marrow and also a little bit of liver. There's no way you're tasting that liver in that burger, I guarantee it. So yeah, I mean, hide it as you need to, if that's what you want to do.
What is because I constantly get people ask me about that, and I always tell them, hey, if you're happy to go ahead and eat that. But concerns on excess amounts, like I know some people are concerned about, say, vitamin A toxicity by consuming too much liver. I mean, there's concerns in pregnancy about some of these things. So what are your thoughts on, is there too much that you can eat it in 1 week or one setting?
Yeah. And again, obviously I'm not a doctor. So you can listen to Shawn over me on this. This is just sort of my 2 cents, but also my research and my own sort of feelings about these things. Generally speaking, it seems like when people are getting like overdose of things like vitamin A or iron, much more frequently that's coming from like supplementation versus whole foods intake, right? In my experience and the research that I've done, it's very tough for most people. Again, maybe you have some kind of pre-existing condition, but like most people are not going to eat so much liver that they get vitamin A toxicity. Like you'd have to work real hard, and most people just don't want to eat that much liver, which I completely understand. So I think that with whole foods, it's just sort of less of a concern. But if you're doing your like blood work relatively consistently, and your lifestyle is pretty sorted out, like this shouldn't really be a concern. And I personally think, like when I was pregnant and people were telling me like, hey, watch out on all that liver, like you're pregnant, I feel like more people would benefit from eating liver than would benefit from like worrying about the toxicity levels. Like nobody bats an eyelash when a pregnant woman says, I'm tired and sick and all I want to do is eat ice cream. They say like, yep, I hear you. That's rough. Like, go eat your ice cream. When I'm saying I crave runny eggs and liver, people are like, hey, you better watch out. Like, that's super dangerous. And I think again about like the common sense, like historically, ancestrally, like we were eating these nutrient dense foods, especially when we're pregnant, because we're working so hard and we're growing a human being from scratch. And our bodies will, preferentially bring all of those nutrients to the baby and not to us. And so we're here suffering because we're eating, low calorie carbs all the time because we feel like crap. And again, it's my personal experience, but I didn't really have any morning sickness. I didn't have any food aversions. I was still eating organ meats. I was eating meat throughout my pregnancy. And I think that some of that, I mean, maybe some of it's genetic, but some of it is the way that I was eating and taking care of myself leading up to pregnancy and throughout that time. So again, this isn't medical advice, but I don't think most people need to worry about having vitamin toxicity from eating liver.
And your pregnancy, I assume, was pretty straightforward, pretty relatively good pregnancy, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Do you have anything to compare it to?
Yeah,
This is the first time,
exactly.
right?
I had nothing to compare it to. The last month I was in hell and miserable because it was summer and I was 10 months pregnant and it was horrible, but generally it was good. And, I had a very empowering, like unmedicated natural birth that I had really hoped for. And my recovery especially was, I think, really, really good. I was very happy about it. And again, I know that pregnancy can be a very like emotionally fraught time. And I don't want to say that if anybody does exactly what I did, they'll have the exact same experience, and it's hard regardless. But I really do believe that my like years leading up to it, people were telling me like, what did you do to prepare for pregnancy? And I'm like, the things I do in my life to prepare myself for being healthy and resilient were the things that prepared me for pregnancy. I didn't do anything to prepare for pregnancy. I ate healthy and strength trained and tried to be strong and fit and mentally resilient. And that's what I think carried me through the pregnancy.
Were you still strength training during your pregnancy as well?
I definitely like knocked it down way more than I thought. Like I had these visions that I would be the woman like knocking out like 10 pull-ups at like 9 months pregnant, and like absolutely not. I was not doing that. But I definitely still moved my body. I still lifted weights. I mean, where I was, unfortunately, our gyms were shut down a lot because I was pregnant during, whatever the billionth wave of the pandemic. And I still, I have a home gym. I was doing what I could, but my gym opened up like 2 weeks before I gave birth, and I was right back in there lifting weights, doing what I could because it made me feel good. And I know how important that kind of consistency is for like my mental health as well as my physical health. But I definitely think it was like, it wasn't the workouts I was doing during my pregnancy that prepared me for birth. It was what I did the 20 years leading up to it, So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you, when I've never written a cookbook. I'm not a cook. I mean, literally, I throw a steak in a grill and throw some salt on it, and that's my cookbook. So, but
that would sell, Shawn.
Yeah, maybe so. But when you're making this and coming up with all these recipes and stuff like that, there's always kind of a trial and error process. I'm assuming, you're like, oh, this didn't turn out as well as I wanted it to. What were some of the errors you made? Because we see we want, I'm going to encourage people to get the final product where everything worked out. But like, what were some of the mistakes you made early on? Like, holy cow, that didn't work. Can you tell some of those things?
That's a fun question. And it's like, I am the same as you. Like prior to writing cookbooks, people would send me DMs like, how do you make heart? How do you make lip? Whatever. And I'd be like, I don't know what to tell you. Like put it in a pan with some butter and salt. Like there it is. But because I kept getting so many questions, I was like, all right, maybe I should come up with some recipes because people want recipes. People want a little bit of direction. So I'm with you on that. I would say like overarching, probably the biggest challenge that I had was overcooking organ meats because, we're talking about red meat and a lot of meat these days, like maybe our community tends to be more on the undercooking side, which I've always been more of like a rare, medium rare steak kind of gal. Mm-hmm. And that kind of holds true with a lot of organs too. But I think there's like this intimidation thing about eating like undercooked organs, or just because I'm unfamiliar with the cut or the type of meat, maybe I was like playing around with stuff and then I take it out and I'm like, I just like cook this to hell. Like it's garbage now. So that was probably something that I did a lot of. And I think also like sourcing good stuff can be challenging. I have a couple recipes in It Takes Guts that are like blood based. So I have like 2 blood sausage recipes. One is a savory one, not blood sausage, blood pudding. One's a savory one and one is a sweet one. So it's chocolate blood pudding. And that's actually a very popular Italian dessert. And it's basically like you're adding a little bit of blood as like a thickener and to like enrich the flavor of chocolate the same way. If anybody here has ever done any kind of like dessert making, if you add espresso to chocolate, it makes it like the flavor stronger. And blood is sort of the same way. So, and I remember like I searched the entire city. I went to like every butcher shop asking people for blood, and people were looking at me like I was a serial killer. And I was like, if butchers are giving me this kind of reaction, like imagine going to like a conventional, grocery store. But so these things take a little bit of extra work and maybe even a little bit of confidence, because it can be intimidating. It can be intimidating to go into these places, not really knowing what you're looking for or what's right, and asking questions. But, you know, I did find, besides some of the weird looks, that generally, if you go to like a farmer's market or you go to a butcher shop, like people are more than happy to kind of help you out and explain some things to you and stuff. So yeah, I would say overall, don't be scared. Don't cook your organs to death. Liver, for instance, should have a little pink. Like if it's like sort of brown cooked all the way through, you probably went too far. Yeah, just have a little bit of like confidence. Just be willing to go out there and try and like buy some things, bring them home, put them in the skillet with some salt, and like just be open-minded.
Yeah, interesting. There was a comment on blood sausage. Steven says he thought it's awesome, and I had some in Miami last year, and I thought it was quite, actually one of the ones I thought was pretty decent, as far as that in bone marrow and stuff. How do you procure blood for those people that are interested in this? Because it's not, it's not, you're not going to see blood on the aisle 3 in the supermarket. Where do you end up getting that stuff? And is it legal everywhere? So is it illegal some places? I don't even know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, ironically enough, up north here in Canada, a lot of meat stuff is legal that isn't throughout the US. Like we can eat like any animal. I know there's like some places in the States that like you can't eat like horse, or like foie gras is being banned and stuff like that. Like up here, it's like a free for all. So that stuff usually isn't too tough to find. But I have found in my experience that there are actually a lot more interesting ingredients available than you think. We just kind of have like trained our eyes to like not look for them, because another argument you could make is about buying sort of conventional meat versus like really high quality, organic, local, whatever. But I will say, like, you can go to almost any grocery store, and if you're looking, you can find chicken liver, chicken hearts, probably chicken gizzards. You might be able to find beef heart. You can probably find marrow bones, like at a lot of like average conventional grocery stores. And if you're comfortable with that, that's an option. But also, if you are lucky enough to have like a local butcher shop that's like the real deal, that's getting their meat locally, if they don't carry it, they may be able to bring it in for you. I've had like special requests where they're bringing in stuff. They often don't carry it just because there's no demand. But if you ask for it, farmers will be happy to bring you what they're not using, right? And then there are also like ethnic markets. So a lot of places, if you go to Asian markets, African markets, Caribbean markets, Mexican places, like a lot of these other cultures are still using these ingredients. They never stopped, and they'll be available. So that's another option. And then sort of lastly, there's a lot of like great online companies now, like especially in the States. I don't have any like direct affiliation with any of these, but like Force of Nature Meats, they do a pre-ground beef liver mix that you can order online, have it shipped to you. US Wellness Meats, like there's a lot of places now that if you want to just experiment, they have pretty much everything you need, and you can order it online. So it's just kind of like, it takes a little bit more work. But.
Yeah, I've had the organ blend from Force of Nature Meats, and it actually wasn't that bad.
I'm convincing you. I'm winning you over, Shawn, over this call. You're getting a little more about it.
Let me ask you just about blood and organ meats in general. Can you freeze blood? What about organ? Do organ meats still okay being frozen? What's the status on that? 'Cause I know steaks you can find. It's usually no problem. But
yep, you can. I got my blood frozen. So I mean, obviously, just like sort of any meat, you you want the meat to be frozen fresh, like right away, immediately frozen. And generally, you don't want to be keeping like frozen organ meats in your freezer for like longer than sort of like 6 months on the outset, because some of these things are a little bit more delicate and maybe more prone to like just freezer burn, or just kind of like not tasting the same. Like it's not necessarily like it's bad, but like for people who have like frozen fruits or vegetables and then you like thaw them, you're like, this isn't tasty the same way anymore. So you want to be maybe a little bit more on top of those things, but it's absolutely still fine and healthy to source sort of frozen organs. Yeah.
How frequently are you eating an organ meat dish? Is it every day, once a week? What's it look like for you?
Yeah. I mean, during the cookbook phase, I was eating like every day. And then when it was done, I was like, I never want to cook anything ever again, because it's an exhausting process, and I was like, get it away from me. But now I would say I'm probably doing maybe 2 to 3 organ meat dishes a month. So it's not a lot, but I also do like a monthly, we have a local farm, and I'll do like a monthly big meat haul. And within that haul of tons of eggs and beef and steak and all of that stuff, I'm always ordering a tongue, probably a beef heart, chicken hearts, chicken liver, bone marrow. I have bone marrow in my fridge, thawing out right now for tonight, actually. But yeah, it's not a lot. It's not every night. It's not every other night. It's like, maybe once a week ish, I'll make something that is organ meat centric.
Yeah. And your other book, Carnivore-ish, and so it's probably, obviously it's meat focused, and then you have a few other ingredients in there. Do you, let me go back to the women thing, because I know somebody was saying they're commenting on your advocacy for women and protein and strength training. How much time do you dedicate to that? Is that still a big part of what you do?
Yeah, it's like probably the biggest part of what I do right now. And I mean, the reason why we really wrote Carnivore-ish is because we somehow live we're in a time and place right now where telling people to eat an animal protein focused diet is either extreme or sneered at or ignored. It's crazy when you think about like the history of human beings and that we've always eaten that way. But that me saying I want to write a book that says you should eat animal protein and other stuff is like weird. Like the idea that I want that to be in like the healthy food section is bizarre. And if you go walk and look at the healthy cookbook section of your big box bookstore, it is virtually all plant-based. It's all vegan, vegetarian cookbooks. And it pisses me off because I think there needs to be at least some semblance of balance. Even if any of us agreed that plant-based was a good idea, the lack of balance is so problematic for our collective health that it was upsetting. And so I said, okay, we've got to do this. Like if I write a cookbook that just says, eat real food, that's not good enough. So we have to kind of have a play on words here that's a little bit cute. And the idea is that these recipes are just food. They're just normal food. There's fruit there, there's vegetables there. There's, I don't know, maybe there's even a little bit of grain. Not really. It's mostly like gluten-free, kind of paleo-ish. But it's just animal protein focused because it is revolutionary right now, somehow, to tell women that animal protein and red meat is good for them. They should eat more of it. And my co-author is a woman in this space too. And I just feel like we're doing a massive disservice to women who are buying these cookbooks, who are going into the healthy food section because they want to be healthy and they want to provide healthy food for their families. And all they can find are vegan salad recipes. So we wanted to just like sneak in there and see if we could change some people's minds. And, again, I work more specifically with women who are trying to build muscle and who are trying to get stronger. And they've been told their entire life that you have to restrict how much you eat, that being the smallest you can be is the priority always. And they're trying to build muscle tissue while eating restrictively and eating low protein. And it's really hard to kind of like unlearn these things that they've been taught for their entire life. The idea that eating heavy protein, as people call it, like animal protein, these heavy foods are actually going to make you look better, lose weight, build muscle, feel better, have a better cycle, have a libido, like all of these things. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but apparently it is. So it's a hard job, but I feel very strongly about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you go into like a Barnes and Nobles or whatever, and you look in there and you're right. In the cookbook side, healthy cookbook, you see a plethora of plant-based sort of diets. You do see, there's meat in the barbecue section. They've got a big section of barbecue and stuff like that, but that's implied that it's, I guess it's implied that it's not healthy, which is, obviously I would strongly disagree with it, as apparently do you. Why should women eat more meat and protein and red meat in particular? What would be your best argument if you had to put forth that? I know I can do it, clearly, but I just want to hear your take on that.
Well, I mean, there's so many arguments, but again, if we're speaking about like women's unique physiology and needs, like cycling women who are having a monthly cycle and a period, we have extra requirements for things like iron and magnesium and copper and all of these things that we are physically like losing out of our body every month. And the best way to get that, again, bioavailability, is through red meat, is through animal sources. And your hormonal health, a lot of people and a lot of like really hard charging like female athletes and stuff, we see these things like the female athlete triad, or like women losing their cycles and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times it's almost like this like badge of honor of like, I'm working so hard, or I got this lean, I'm losing my period. That is a massive sign that your body is not functioning properly and is telling you that it's like in survival mode essentially. And you don't have to want to become pregnant for that stuff to matter to you. It's a really, really big warning sign that your body isn't functioning properly. So yeah, I mean, and again, if you want to build tissue, like this is what I tell women who are like, it's like a semantics thing too. I think that we don't understand like the terms that we're using a lot of the time. Like people, I joke, I rail all the time on social media about the word toned and how stupid it is, and how no one really knows. Like we think toned means like, I don't know, have this like lean Pilates body or whatever. And that if you eat less and if you do yoga all the time, you're going to look toned. But like body composition, as we all know, is about building up that skeletal muscle so that when you lose whatever the desired amount of body fat is, you have this like pleasing fit shape, right? And that's going to look different for different people. But so many women, they don't prioritize the strength training, and they don't prioritize the protein that's going to build and support this skeletal muscle. And so they work really hard to lose the fat by doing this chronic cardio and eating plant-based, and they get to a certain size and they're not happy with how they look, because we're misunderstanding what that body composition, what that look and what it takes to get there actually is. So yeah, I mean, it's like literally the only advice I give to pretty much all women across the board, like trying to get my period, trying to get pregnant, trying to build muscle, trying to lose weight. It's like eat more protein. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a pretty good general thing. There are people, particularly in the plant-based world, that will say that, we only need a minimal amount of protein, and any excess protein is going to lead to premature aging, lead to things like cancer and so on and so forth. And they base that on, studies in fruit flies and mice and stuff like that, which is, the human data doesn't seem to support that at all, but we still have that belief there. Let me just for frame of reference, I know there's different recommendations, 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilo, up to 2.2, but do you have a general target of protein that you try to get personally?
Yeah, I don't like working in kilos. I'm Canadian, I should, but I don't. So I still deal with like grams per pound because it's just easier for me to remember. But for me personally, this isn't necessarily ideal for everybody, but personally, I'm usually trying to do a little bit more than 1 gram per pound of lean mass. So somewhere between that number and 1 gram per pound of like actual body weight. So, if I'm 130 pounds, but I have 108 pounds of like lean mass, or, for example, I'm trying to eat like 115, 120-ish grams of protein per day. And if I'm in like a hard charging muscle building phase, I might up that a little bit. I mean, I know there's plenty of studies out there that kind of show if you're going to overeat something, protein's the thing to do because it's much less likely to be stored as fat. You're just not going to gain weight over eating protein the same way you would eating the other two macros. And also it's like such a high satiety thing that like you really don't have to worry about chronically overeating protein. Like as delicious as steak is, you're just not going to overeat that all day, every day. It's so satisfying. So yeah, so I would say like, for most people, like 1 gram per pound of like your ideal body weight, or like somewhere around there, is maybe a decent starting point. Mm-hmm. But it also like ebbs and flows, right? Like it's more about kind of consistency over time and about addressing what your immediate goal is. Like, are you looking to lose a ton of body fat? Are you looking to build muscle? Are you training for something? Things are going to change based on your goals, but that's a decent starting point, I think.
What are your thoughts on like supplementing your diet with like protein powders and whatnot? Is that something you think is advisable? Is it, because some people say, well, I just can't afford to get protein from food. I can't eat enough. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be certainly an option. I mean, I think there's always like best, okay, suboptimal choices. And obviously, if you can get most of your protein from like whole food sources, that's great. I personally don't need to use a lot of like protein supplements because again, I'm not a large person. It's not hard for me to get 120 grams of protein a day, but I also know that if you're like a 260-pound dude and you have a busy job and you need to crush some protein shakes, like that's also fine. I don't think you want to necessarily like rely on it, but it can definitely help. And I'm also kind of an advocate too of like making the best choices with what you have available to you, because I think that especially with like social media and stuff, we see everyone's sort of perfect highlight reel or whatever, and we think if we can't be perfect, like screw it. So I know there's like a lot of people who might get overwhelmed and give up when they think I can't eat, perfect, organic, grass finished, local meat all the time. So like whatever, I'll just eat whatever I can find. There are other options. You can eat slightly less than perfect meat sources. You can have a protein shake every now and then. It's still better than shopping in the middle of the aisle at the grocery store or buying fast food or going plant-based.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I didn't touch on this, but, and when we were talking about, the availability of various things in Canada, some people will talk about dairy and the excessive raw dairy, which I think I might be mistaken. I think it's illegal in Canada if I'm not mistaken, but are you a dairy person? What are your thoughts around dairy?
Yeah, I think it is illegal in some places. I do very fondly remember there was a really good farmer's market near where I used to live that had raw dairy that they sold for your dogs, which we purchased very frequently and drank ourselves. Drink and purchase at your own risk, I guess. But I mean, I'm a fan of raw and unpasteurized. But I personally do eat dairy, and I think that that's one of those things that is sort of individual. I don't think that food is like across the board bad or good. I know that there are a lot of people who have a hard time digesting dairy. And in that case, I often tell people like, obviously the best quality dairy sources you can get are going to be better. And things like goat dairy products are usually better because they have lower lactose, which is the thing that most people have a hard time with. So get some like goat yogurt, some goat milk. It's delicious. But I personally don't have any issue digesting dairy, and I enjoy it, and it's good to kind of up the old protein. So I'll do like Greek yogurt sometimes. I'll make smoothies. I put cream in my coffee. So yeah, I like it.
What is the again? I'll go back to the liver because people are saying I can't masticate. What is the best tip you have? Is it soaking it in milk, soaking it in lemon juice? Have you found anything, or do you even care? I mean, maybe you just like it the way it is. But if you wanted to say, I want it to not have that livery taste,
Yeah.
what do you recommend?
I have to say, and this might like burst some people's bubble, but like there's no amount of soaking in milk that is going to make kidney or liver not taste like kidney or liver. So you can soaking can help. It can get rid of some of the like excess blood and like it can take it down a notch, but it's not going to like suddenly make it taste like steak. So there's that. But I would say one recommendation that I have, and depending on what kind of meat you like to eat, one big recommendation for making these things more palatable is to buy organs from smaller animals. So chicken, duck, turkey, even lamb, their organs are smaller and are going to have a more mild taste. Like a chicken liver tastes completely different than a buffalo liver or a beef liver. And they're easier to mask. They're going to taste better on their own. So if you're kind of like just getting into it, or you're a little intimidated by the taste, like make a chicken liver mousse, chop up some duck hearts and liver and put that in your stir fry or whatever you're doing. Like start with the smaller animals first, because those big animals, their organs are going to taste strong no matter what you do.
Yeah, I will say when I was in France visiting a very called the Périgord, I think, which is where they do a lot of foie gras. It was actually quite good. I quite enjoyed it there. So I should say not across the board. There are some that I certainly like bone marrow, and I don't mind the blood sausages, and the foie gras is pretty good. But anyway, well, we're unfortunately running out of time here. But Ashleigh, where can people go to find out where they can get the cookbook, maybe your social media or anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, and thank you so much for letting me come on. It's been overdue us connecting, and I've actually never done one of these kind of like live things before, so it's super cool to have people kind of on and interacting. It's very nice, so I appreciate all of you guys taking the time. If you want to connect with me at all, I'm mostly on Instagram, and my handle is The Muscle Maven. And I have a website. It's just my name. It's ashleighvanhouten.com, and you can find information about my podcast, all the programs that I have, all the books, and then the 2 books, It Takes Guts and Carnivore-ish, are wherever good books are sold. It may not be in the health food section, but it'll be there somewhere. So look a little further and you'll find it. But yeah, they're everywhere books are sold.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, thank you, and keep up the good work, and congrats on the new little baby. And let's check back in down the road. And stay cool in Canada for a while, and then you certainly
and then stay warm.
Then stay warm. All right. Okay, guys. Thank you, everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.